Welcome to our panel on European EdTech with 4 of Europe's leading EdTech entrepreneurs, Pierre, Lucy, Michal, and Felix, and we'll get them to introduce themselves in a second. My name is Lynn-Matern. I am the founder and one of the general partners at eMERGE. eMERGE is a first check writer in Europe. So we serve the early stage founders in European EdTech, and the majority of our LPs are operators, so people that have built some of the most successful EdTech companies in the world, and we get them involved in helping find our deals, diligence them, they sit on our company's boards, and that's really how we support them to get to Series A. And the reason I do this is I got lucky. My parents are from an immigrant background, grew up in the Soviet Union, came to Germany in the late 70s, started there from zero. And I got lucky and got a scholarship to Oxford, and my world opened up and completely changed. And so our mission at eMERGE with the rest of the team is to invest in companies that democratize access to opportunity. So that's a bit about me. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves as well. So give us 2 things. Give us your why do you do what you do, and your how. What is it that you do, and where are you in your journey? And we'll just go in order in which we're sitting. So Pierre, go for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jan. Thanks for having me. I'm Pierre. Started a company called OpenClassrooms 10 years ago. Started actually this as a personal project 20 years ago when I was in middle school. I started creating online courses with a friend of mine. We did so prior to studies for many, many years as a pure hobby. Really, we built the courses which we had and shared that to your friends. It became the reference platform to learn coding in French-speaking countries, and at the end of our studies, we turned that into a business. So we're now a B Corp certified company, and our mission is to make education accessible, especially education leading to jobs. So we became the very first fully online college in France, and now we operate in 100 countries to train on career-oriented degree programs, leading to new jobs, new skills. So we sell to B2B clients, 2,000 B2B clients from Amazon, Target to PwC, McDonald's, and so on. So upskilling, reskilling, and apprenticeship. So we raised $150 million, and we're about 500 employees.
And why do you do what you do?
Because I just started. I happened to do that when I was 11 to create online courses, and it was kind of a natural segue to continue to do that at the end of my studies. So it took us a lot of our free time, and we thought, do we drop it or do we make it a full-time job? So it was kind of really natural for us, starting with free online courses to building a college.
Great. I'm Lucy Stonehill. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called BridgeU. Similar to Pierre, I think with the common thread with a lot of EdTech founders is you kind of go through an experience yourself and feel sort of inspired by largely the challenges around that experience. The same is true of me. When I was going through the sort of latter stages of secondary school, thinking about a huge and kind of complex decision, which was sort of what was I going to do thereafter. I felt the kind of critical infrastructure to manage that decision-making process was really lacking, and it struck me as sort of strange that we don't support learners with making better and more informed decisions. And that's really where I think technology and data science could play a really powerful role in that process. So focused on that as a problem space. Fast forward 7-8 years later, BridgeU is the leading provider of college and career guidance solutions into secondary schools that have an international kind of global orientation. So we work with high schools in 130 countries. And we support increasingly higher ed partners with tapping into that highly diverse and sort of very rich pool of student talent. I think for me, similar to you, Pierre, I think I was personally inspired by a journey that felt fragmented and problematic, and then also graduated, at the tail end of the Great Recession, where, you worked very hard to then on the back end of higher education not be able to get a job. So sort of bookended the experience I had at going into college and then graduating, feeling like, again, we're struggling to support learners in mapping their path forward. But I think because of the nature of where we work in the world, which is largely in emerging markets, I think there's a broader mission behind the business, which is recognizing that talent is equally distributed and opportunity is not. And that mismatch certainly occurs at the higher education level. So that's a very, I think, driving force behind my why.
Thank you, Lucy. Michal Borkowski from Brainly, and let's start with what. Brainly is an online learning platform for students, parents, and teachers. And the way it works is that students can get help with any type of educational questions. So this can be homework questions, test preparation, whatever they struggle with. And the way it works is that students help students, and we add expert supervision on top of that to make sure that the knowledge exchange is done in the correct way. And we also add AI on top of that to learn on learning patterns, so in long term we can influence educational outcomes. We operate in 35 countries, about 350 million monthly active users from pretty much all over the place. In some countries, we are used by 20% of all students every day. So that's quite powerful. From why, I just wish I had a product like that when I was in high school, and that's the reason I started it.
My name is Felix. I'm one of the co-founders of GoStudent. It's one of the world's leading tutoring companies, connecting children in the age of 6 to 19 to world-class teachers. And the main reason for founding that company is I think every child deserves a great teacher, and lack of access to great teachers is one of the most fundamental problems that we observe on a global scale. Every country is handling that a bit different, but because of that we started the business 7 years ago, and continue the journey in the future.
All right, thank you very much. So going back to the purpose of the panel, Europe. So Europe is hot right now, as you may know, and we're going to discuss what's happening. So I've been investing in European EdTech for the last 7 years. Over the last 2 years, the space has really heated up in terms of the ambition of the companies and founders, the amount of capital invested both within and from outside Europe. And just to give you a few benchmarks, so in 2020, European EdTech companies raised $800 million. In 2021, that grew to $3 billion. And it's actually the fastest growing region globally in terms of venture dollars invested. Within that, you've got some mega rounds happening and some incredible companies. First of all, BridgeU was just acquired for $430 million odd by Chegg. Felix, you've raised, I think I got this right, $690 million over the last 1.5 years. Okay. And there have been some other amazing rounds.
We have high cash burn.
Yeah. Yeah. Drinks on you later. And then, so Michal, you've raised 80 million in your latest round. Pierre, similar. We can talk about your capital journey, Lucy, as well. You sold your business to Kaplan. There have been some other mega rounds. 360 Learning has raised $200 million. CoachUp just raised $110 million. Multiverse raised $130 million. Perligo just raised $50 million. And the reason I say this is because I think it's significant that these companies that are built within and from Europe are not competing within sort of fragmented European markets. They are competing to be the global leaders within their categories, and they're doing so successfully. And that's new. That wasn't the case, in the last decade in which I've been investing in Europe. So, really excited about our conversation today to dive into that and explore what is happening and why it's happening. So, we're going to have 3 topics. We're going to start macro level, looking at the last 10 years. What has it been like to build a company from Europe? What have been the challenges? Then second topic is what's happened over the last 2 years? How has the pandemic impacted European founders? What's happened in terms of access to talent? What's happened to the opportunity set available to these companies? And then the third topic we'll talk about is the funding environment itself. How are these founders navigating it right now? What are they discussing with their boards in terms of when to raise, and what are their predictions for the future? So we're going to go and do a round robin at the end and get a prediction from them on the European funding environment. So stick around for that. We're going to start with topic 1, macro. What's happened over the last 10 years? What has it been like to build a company in Europe? And I'll start with Pierre. So you said you started your company when you were 11. So I don't know exactly how old you are, but you're not 20. So you've seen like 20 years of EdTech in Europe. And so I'm really interested to hear from you, how has that been like, and what are the changes that you've seen along the way in terms of being a European founder building a global EdTech company?
Yeah, so first, I think the first 10 years of our journey was probably not really about education, but more about building a company. I think we didn't have, I started in France, and in France, I think 20 years ago, tech entrepreneurship was not really a thing. So there was no ecosystem, it was hard to raise, seed, Series A, or any round, frankly. And I started the business when we were students, it was just hard. Nothing was really designed to build a company. Nowadays, I mean, it's way easier. It's pretty easy to raise, a few million, seed, Series A, and the ecosystem has blossomed. And startup companies all over the place, and on medias and so on. So it's attractive to be a founder. So it was really about entrepreneurship, and then probably about 5-6 years ago, really starting the collective journey on education, EdTech. I think we're almost the only ones on education in France, more or less. And then obviously in the past 2 years with COVID, that completely changed. So the narrative completely changed from in-person education to online. We've seen many companies, starting to raise significant amounts and go from Series A to Series B, C, D, and so on. So the past 2 years completely changed from in-person to online. The talent shortage also has massively increased. And we started to really, I think in the past couple of years, compete globally, as you said, instead of being in kind of national fragmented markets. So that's kind of our journey in a nutshell, 15 years ago, entrepreneurship, then 5 years ago, education, and then 2 years ago, COVID, acceleration of the market and kind of stuff, and getting really global. And by the way, when you think about raising rounds and so on, I mean, most of our investors are US based, frankly. So they're not really at late stage. There are not so many European late stage investors in education. So we see more and more C Series A, but I would say late stage remains really outside of Europe. So the fact that European companies can actually raise this amount means really that they're truly global.
Yeah, amazing, and couldn't agree more. And that's kind of what we're seeing across the portfolio as well. Felix, so it would be great to talk through your funding story. I think there's a sort of pre-pandemic GoStudent, and then there's the post-pandemic GoStudent. So maybe you can contrast the two, and specifically with regards to funding, kind of what was it like raising capital as a European founder pre-pandemic, and then were you mainly going after European investors back then, and then now you've raised for more international funds, and how have the two sort of differed in their approach, and do you think European investors are catching up with the US competition? So over to you.
I mean, we founded the business in Austria, right? Most people don't even know what Austria is, except for Arnold Schwarzenegger and maybe the Glock guns. No, I think we had to be what I want to say is we had to think globally from day one, because we started the business in such a small market. And I think this is for every European education founder a big advantage, because the single market is just not big enough to be attractive for investors to raise these large rounds. Also, if you look at historically the biggest education companies in the world, they have all originated in China, and they have this huge addressable market, so they were never in need of scaling their core business to other markets. So I think that is, for the European landscape, is a big advantage. For us, raising money pre-pandemic, to be honest, it was super tough. I think if you build an education company, you have to definitely be super crazy, because it's very difficult, and that's often because of the business model. Right, we spent actually 3.5 years finding the right business model that we can apply and that we can scale across countries. And I still remember when we raised our Series A round, it took us, I think, 7 months in total. We started that process in mid of 2019. And back then, in mid of 2019, we were only operating in the German-speaking language. And we were selling our tutoring services there. And the feedback that we received from basically all investors was always the market, the addressable market is too small. If you cannot build a multi-billion-dollar company because you only operate in the DACH market. And that was also one of the reasons we said, okay, let's actually tackle international expansion fast and scale our operations in as many countries as possible. And because of that, today we operate in 23 markets. That allowed us tremendously in raising larger rounds because investors understand, okay, we operate in 23 markets, therefore addressable market, 23 times bigger than if you just operate in one market. We can pay higher valuations and we can give you bigger checks. So that definitely helped. Now, during the pandemic, I mean, the whole awareness for digital education has accelerated. So we also see this, that a lot of the later stage growth investors have been more active in that space, in companies that we have on the stage today, or in some Indian players, some US players. So the awareness for the topic, kind of, it just got more sexier, the whole topic. But still, one thing we really should not underestimate is, again, finding the right business model. What is the core that you offer? Because the pandemic cannot solve for that. So this is something you still need to prove and show in an efficient way.
And I guess so. We've talked about funding a little bit. One other topic that I think is super interesting to look at is talent. And our founders over the last 10 years, started out in an environment where there wasn't a lot of tech talent, product talent, engineering talent, and we're now in a world where talent is remote. So I would love to hear from Michal and Lucy. What have your sort of strategies been for sourcing talent? What we are seeing across the portfolio is being in Europe, traditionally, people have taken advantage of countries in the same time zone, Eastern Europe, South Africa, building their dev shops there. Have you done the same? And then, how has the pandemic affected your approaches to talent? So maybe we'll start with Michal and then Lucy.
Yeah, so I think that for a very long time, we had a great traction with attracting talent for online education business. And that was very different to the investor story, where there wasn't really a lot of investment purely in education, and there were not that many funds focused on education. So there was this weird polarization, like difference between the level of talent you could get and the investment you could have attracted. So we always based that on us being a consumer business in the early days. But before the pandemic, on the talent side, we had quite a lot of success with attracting people who lived from south and east from Poland to move to Poland, because our international team was based in Poland. And then we created a second hub, being the US, that supported our North and South America. And that strategy worked very, very well for some time. But I think the better strategy these days is the remote work that we abruptly had to switch to. And we were very, very afraid of that, but I think now we love it, we embrace it, we don't plan to come back to the way it used to be. So I think, to sum up, from talent perspective, I always felt that education is such an important topic, and everybody has a personal connection to it. Everybody here can remember these amazing teachers and these terrible teachers, these great experiences and these terrible experiences from your school. And because it's so personal, then if you show that this business can help students like you from the past to solve the problems that you had, it makes it very, very attractive for people to join. So it was always a great sales proposition for us to attract talent.
And just to follow up quickly on that, Michal, so could you give us a snapshot, how many people are you across the org, and how are they distributed geographically right now?
Yeah, so right now we are at about 450 people. We still have physical locations in the US, in New York, in Barcelona, in Spain, in Krakow, in Poland, and in Bangalore, in India. That said, we are quite agnostic to where you are as long as you can make it to the calls. So if you wish to work during the night and you can make it to the calls that you need to join, we are fine with you working from Bali if you want to, right? In fact, we had some people move to Bali, and they that ended in different ways because I think that place has its own atmosphere. But you know, I think this remote work thing is amazing from talent perspective.
Yeah. And for you, Lucy, so I mean, remote opens the possibility to obviously compete with companies everywhere and access better talent, but equally, other companies are competing for that talent too. So has it become harder or easier for you to build your org?
I think in some ways both. I mean, I've always felt actually talent and being able to access a theoretically very diverse and wide-ranging pool of talented people, it is a strength of Europe, actually, if you're able to kind of harness it and create the appropriate setups to be able to sort of tap into different pools of talent. I mean, we, you know, have been based in our headquarters are in London, but very early into BridgeU's journey. In fact, I think it was, you know, weeks after I'd raised our seed round, I positioned to our investors the idea that we needed to have multiple global hubs because, you know, what's now the case and was always the case really is that because we're a business that operates heavily in emerging markets, you know, there's only so long I think that you can kind of hold out in Western Europe without being closer to your customers. So we opened an office in Hong Kong, you know, very, very early, actually strangely early, I think, in the development of the business overall, and we're lucky to have investors that supported that. The other proactive, I suppose, location that we sourced tech talent from, recognizing, you know, when our CTO came on board in 2017, we just couldn't hire enough tech talent in London with the tech stack that we had. So, you know, that again, I think historically has been an advantage, specifically if you are located in one of the hubs like a London or a Berlin, is to look elsewhere across continental Europe for, you know, fantastic engineers, frankly, who don't or haven't traditionally had the same opportunities locally. So we really invested in Madrid and Spain as a sort of extended hub of engineering talent. And then the really interesting thing, I think, for us over the pandemic period is that we actually opened, you know, theoretically sort of virtual offices, right? But we hired talent in Colombia, Bogota, in DC, in Shanghai, in Dubai, right? So we expanded our global footprint very considerably. And it, you know, I think there's a couple of reasons why that happened, but I think this sort of mindset shift that, you know, there is all this talent. And in fact, if you are a very global business, you know, we probably should have been thinking about this way ahead of when the pandemic sort of prompted that. I think on the flip side, what's also happened, and we've been hurt by this, is that for a very long time, right, American startups or, you know, well-funded North American companies sort of said, oh, Europe's very far away, right? And it was often the founders that have a European background that said, no, we can definitely source talent and also have a US presence. Now, over the pandemic period, you have, you know, a whole bunch of very well-funded Silicon Valley startups saying, why shouldn't we also be able to participate in the Spanish engineering ecosystem? And then, sure enough, you have a completely different benchmark for what you're expected to then pay. So I think, you know, there's sort of strengths. We've you know, doubled our kind of global footprint in terms of talent over the pandemic period. We've also really had to kind of reckon with a very different, I think, expected price point.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. I think all of this, like this entire conversation already goes to show that, you know, to the name of the organizers of this conference, like unicorns are being born around the world. It's a global Silicon Valley. It's not constrained to the US anymore. So super fascinating. And another topic that I think is super interesting with regards to kind of how the pandemic has changed, you know, how we build businesses from Europe is just actually what's happened to the market. So from the demand side, how both consumers' spending patterns have shifted and government and business spending patterns have shifted. And if you haven't noticed, we've basically got two kinds of businesses on the panel. We've got Pierre with OpenClassroom, who's serving the enterprise and governments, and then we've got, you know, BridgeU, Brainly, and GoStudent, who obviously serve parents. So I'd love to go to both groups, and I'll let you guys fight out who takes this one. But how has how have spending patterns shifted and the opportunity set that's available to you as a result of the pandemic? And specifically, I'd love you to comment on Europe. So Europe as a market and in comparison to other markets that you operate in. So maybe Pierre, you start, and then we'll go to you guys.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, the usage in B2C really increased because basically nobody had anything to do during the lockdown. So you spend time on online courses and online training. Then we started also seeing governments and companies, frankly, invest massively in training their people. Governments to reskill job seekers when unemployment rates really increase significantly to fight economic crisis and downturn. And then that completely shifted again in the past 6-9 months because of the talent shortage. So now companies started to massively inject money into upskilling, reskilling, apprenticeship because of the talent shortage. So they're desperate to hire talent.
Which companies? Which type of company?
I mean, from, you have big statements, big announcements from, I don't know, PwC pledged $3 billion in upskilling and reskilling. Amazon Career Choice spent like $2 billion a year on this tuition assistance program. It's like every major company injects now like hundreds of millions on upskilling and reskilling. Apprenticeship became also really a big thing. You have many companies also pledging to hire 5% of apprentices in the workforce. So we're talking thousands of apprentices. So those are massive commitments, massive budgets as well, and they're really desperate. It's there is no other way for them to attract talent, especially if you're not, the tier 1 top brands, you're not the Google or the Apples of the world. How can you find 1,000 data scientists? You have to build them. So you need to invest, and that's kind of the play right now. Talent shortage, talent retention is obviously also has become really a trend with the Great Resignation and so on. And then finally, especially in the States, you've seen more diversity issues becoming, kind of a board CEO level issue, not just kind of a CSR thing.
Yeah, and I'd love to quickly follow up on that, Pierre, because we've got some entrepreneurs in the audience, and I think there's some great tactical insights coming from this. What you've just said. For these new budgets for upskilling and reskilling and apprentices, who is the ideal buyer profile within these organizations, and what's the budget that it's coming out of? Because one of the sort of accepted wisdoms is that the annual L&D budget for a single person is something like 1,500 euros or dollars or pounds, depending where you are. But then companies spend orders of magnitude more on upskilling programs. And is it coming out of the hiring budget because they can't hire these people, so they just invested in training people? And do you sell it therefore to the business unit leader, or do you sell it to the HR and L&D department?
I mean, L&D departments typically are not the best departments to sell to, frankly. So you can try, but maybe this is not where you're going to have your best luck. CEO commitments. The problem, obviously, right now is that you have those big statements made by CEOs, and then how does that translate into actual programs? That's kind of the trick. It doesn't really cascade down the organization. So we typically sell to CHROs. Then budgets, frankly, don't really come from L&D. It might come from talent acquisition, or it might directly come from business leaders. It's it's becoming more and more of a business issue to solve the talent and the skills gap. So they can, they're losing money, bleeding money because they cannot hire. So at some point, it's not an L&D issue anymore.
Yep.
No. So I would recommend talk to CHROs and then business unit leaders, and then if you're solving a business issue, they'll find the budget right now. I mean, there is a huge talent shortage that you huge need, so they'll find out.
Yeah, we have a great company in the portfolio, Sales Impact, which is playing right into that and just experiencing massive growth. They're here as well. And then, so the three of you, so you're in the thanks, Pierre. You're in the parent market. Would love to hear from you. What has happened in terms of spending patterns from parents? We all know that over the pandemic, people have experienced online education and haven't, on the whole, been that happy with it in those age ranges, and as a result, have been more willing to spend on supplemental education. But how have your different markets reacted differently? And what do you reckon will stay and what will revert? So feel free to jump in if you have a strong view on this question. One of the three of you, and then we can cover a few.
I mean, in our case, in the case of getting private teachers for your child, this market has always been super big, also pre-pandemic. So the market size as a whole has not really changed, but what has changed is the medium that families can use to get that service, right? So we had a lot of parents pre-pandemic where we had to educate them how to use Zoom to make the video call with the tutor and get the tutoring session. So this has definitely changed. I mean, I can even do now FaceTime calls with my grandmother and she understands it. So this awareness for video calls and using online as a medium for digital education, this has accelerated a lot, and I think also allows for a lot of new business models to grow. What is still very important, at least in our space, in the parent market, is you need to build trust in order to create big lifetime value. So in our case, for example, we use actually a big sales team selling our tutoring services on the phone. Yeah, I mean, companies like BridgeU in India, they started selling door-to-door, a mobile app subscription. Often people don't actually understand that, but we use the salespeople to create trust on the phone, and then by using and leveraging that trust, we can sell bigger packages and create this lifetime value. This is something we rely heavily on.
Yeah, I think it's such a smart insight into the go-to-market, and yeah, you've really tied up that whole market with it. And Lucy, what about you?
Yeah, no, I was going to add. I mean, we peripherally impact sort of parents in that we're supporting their child with a huge purchasing decision, but our customers are actually the secondary schools and then they're the universities, and we're sort of supporting them with different use cases. But I definitely echo, Felix, what you were saying about seeing a mindset shift. I think one of the challenges, I think in particular, certainly at K-12 level, that EdTech has had for a long time is trying to compete against human resources for budget allocation. And I think also been battling this broad perception that EdTech is sort of nice to have but not need to have. And I think the pandemic completely shifted that. And certainly at the K-12 level, we've seen heads of schools starting to actually allocate, a time to consider an EdTech strategy for the first time. So recognizing that it is not just a nice to have set of tools that can supplement the learning process, but can actually be very integral to the school's ability to maintain continuity during sort of periods of inevitable sort of ups and downs. I think on the higher ed side, and we work with enrollment and admissions officers on the higher ed side, and we support them with a variety of tactics to explore how to reach and recruit from across our very diverse base of students. And that's been a fascinating shift, right? Because for those of you who know much about recruitment and admissions, I mean, it's extraordinarily a sort of analog industry, right? Upwards of probably 90% of the spend has been on humans and travel and print banner ads in Malaysia, right? And so we come along with a digital solution, and certainly trying to position that to leading European universities pre-pandemic was trying to push a boulder up a hill, and then they had this very clear point of forced change, which I think upon retrospect, I think they knew it was going to have to come at some point. But like with many of these businesses, I think it's been a major force for acceleration. But definitely echo Felix's point about sort of the mindset shift, certainly in the segments we work with, being quite significant.
Michal, do you want to add a quick summary from your perspective on this question as well?
Yeah, I think that when the pandemic hit, it was overnight. Teachers had to learn how to teach. Students had to learn how to learn online. Parents had to learn how to teach as well. And that was a huge transition. And over the time, what we've seen was a lot of fatigue over online learning. And I think majority of people were like begging for the schools to reopen. And online learning had also a lot of negative impact on mental health of students. And based on what we've seen, about 10% of students globally were left outside of the educational system in the countries where we operate. And that's a definitely sad outcome of that. Yeah? And after this fatigue connected to online learning, we feel that there is some time of adjustment right now. Teachers have to figure out what are their criteria for students to meet, and some teachers kind of try to follow the students who excelled during the online learning phase, but some of them lower expectations to make sure that everybody can meet these expectations, even the students who are outside of the system. So I think everybody's trying to figure it out, and definitely this school year is a bit like that for us from the perspective of what we see. Long term, I'm totally with Felix on the impact of the skills that were built during this time. Students and parents had to test the different products. They liked some products, they disliked other products. So ultimately, the best products are going to win.
Yeah, great summary. So we have 4 minutes left, and I'm going to ask each of you to spend about 1 minute talking about your view on the current funding environment. I want to know what are the conversations that you're having with your board members right now in terms of, do we raise capital right this second because of what's happening in public markets and we don't know what's going to happen next? Or is actually now the wrong time to raise because valuations are going to be depressed a little bit, and it's smarter to wait a year if the runway exists and see what happens. So I'll go from Pierre down, and yeah, please comment on that one and include your prediction for what's going to happen to European funding in that response, because we promised a prediction to people, so we have to give it.
I mean, public markets on EdTech really took a hit, in the past couple of months. So clearly, public market caps and so on are less high than they were 6-9 months ago. So that's a fact. Now, did that reflect in private markets? It will eventually. I mean, it has to, because at some point, those companies, growth late-stage companies, they go public, and there is at some point, a gap to bridge there. So it will be reflected in private markets, if not already. Then the question is that a timing issue? Is that kind of a foundational issue in the market? I don't think it's a foundational issue. I mean, the market dynamics in EdTech are really, really strong, and all of those companies, they're still growing. There's more demand. There's talent shortage, needs for skills, needs for online teaching, and so on. So, the conversation we have with our board is really like we're in this game for the long term. So it's a long run. We're fine. I mean, we have cash. Is that the right moment? Fine. I mean, it's not only about kind of maximizing, valuation at a given time. So
are you raising now or you're waiting?
No, we're always raising. So please come on stage and sign me a check. We'll take it. But the question is do you raise every 6 months? Do you raise every 3 years, or do you need to raise? Because frankly, right now we're at the stage in which we don't really have to raise. Then we're running more and more consolidation also on the market, so that takes capital as well. So it's kind of a balance, but it's hard. Markets are really volatile right now, so it's a bit hard to predict where they're gonna land. But it's definitely choppier right now than it was 6 months ago.
Okay, Felix, I think we only have one comment, time for one comment left. So what about you? Same question. What's your board deciding right now?
I mean, for early stage companies, the music is still fully on. So grab the money, yeah. So it's still very competitive, and it's like all the early stage funds. I mean, the Coutus and Tigers of this world, they are now entering the early stage battlefield. So there's lots of money you can collect. When it comes to a later stage, close to exit, also as Pierre said, it's going to be right now. It's going to be much tougher. So if you want to raise just on your operational business, large check sizes, it's challenging. I mean, the late stage growth sector right now almost shut down completely. So I think you need to have a very good argument why you need the cash now, what is the usage of it, and good companies then will always be able to raise some money.
Awesome. Okay. Sorry we couldn't get to you guys at the end there, but we're running out of time. Thank you very much for listening to us. Really appreciate it, and thank you to you.
Thank you.